So first of all, I want to thank you, everyone that's here, that are present here in the panel, and for GSV for inviting all of us here that put a beautiful panel together. And I think that we'll have now a great time to share about what's happening in Brazil, why it's booming. So let's start with Leticia here. Leticia is doing a beautiful job in Camino, changing how the K-12 spaces it's being constructed. So I'll start just with the first question. That's basically how it's you and Fernando that's here in the panel with us, how you guys are changing the learning experience of kids now, and how this will change the Brazilian ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I think that maybe, we're talking about the booming edtech industry, so maybe we should just talk about if, edtech and learning are different. Brazil right now is coming out of 2 years of isolation, basically. A lot of kids are still not back in school. We have probably the world's worst indexes in learning for most of our children and learning outcomes. So when we talk about edtech in Brazil, I think we are not talking about one thing or the other. Right now, the only way we're going to reach this whole country and all of these challenges is with new technology, and however we can understand technology, that is going to be able to make space for learning. And when we talk about learning, and maybe that's as an educator where we see, I think that we are talking about all of what we learned in the sciences. We're not talking about guessing. We're talking about student and learning-centered interactions in a world where we've seen, and I think this is the third day of a conference that basically has talked about how content is available, and what we're discussing right now is how we're learning and how we're using this. In K-12 schools, this means, in Brazil especially, a different way of teaching and learning, a different way where you're going to see students and teachers and how they're going to interact, because if knowledge is out there, how is it that we're interacting? And I think my panel is going to bring some of these ideas. There are repercussions that are going on into where our workforce is going, which have to do with how we're applying learning, how we're just making deep learning dives, and that means a new methodology. For Brazilians and for the Brazilian industry and for the ecosystem to move, we're going to need help in every sector to think about different ways that we're going to learn. Sometimes we're going to have adaptive, direct instructions. Sometimes we're going to have different technologies that are going to come in. In K-12, we need a new way of bringing in content and learning experiences, and that being about connection, adaptation. We have huge gaps. They're patterns. They're everywhere around Brazil. There's not one solution. But there's a sequence of things that we need to be looking at. How we learn, how are we connecting, how is that relevant to the student and where we are, what are the limitations, what are the things that we structurally need to change. And Camino has been trying to dive into that question with both feet, literally, and I think that K-12 deserves this. I actually have like a shout out. I wish we were talking more about K-12, because even though reskilling comes in, later on, K-12 is the next wave. Next year, we're all going to be talking about this. But I guess I talked too much. Sorry.
It was amazing, actually. So interesting, because you brought this workforce piece. And Sebastian, you're doing a very interesting job in Digital House, offering a space for people that really want to do an upskilling program, or to have get a better career, or actually change their income, like from scratch. So allowing them to get a better life. And you came from Argentina and decided to build this in Brazil. So how was this process and why you created Digital House in Brazil?
Very good. Hi, everybody. So yeah, there's actually a recent study from LinkedIn on jobs in technology. Estimates, in the next 5 years, 150 million new jobs in the world, and only in Brazil 9 million. You can. It's more or less, but that's really a big demand for sure in the world and in Brazil, and really it's an opportunity for Brazil, also for Latin America, to be able to develop as a knowledge economy, to be able to sell internally, export knowledge, that it's technology, digital skills. Which one of the big advantages is a global language. You learn to code. It's the same thing in it's a language, coding language. You learn to do data science. It's the same methodology. So that's what drove us to start Digital House. And the key here for us is that we prepare the students for the job. So if you're curious, you could come to Digital House, but what you're going to get is a training that will actually allow you to start to work on this, either change your career, and that has to do with different things, from the methodology, from the practice, from the access to a professor that can accelerate you, to the updating of the content. So really, the goal is that to be able to, okay, there's a need, there's an opportunity. And it's really being able to start working on this, and actually we look at our training as a project. So you really develop a project and you go learning as you go, but really you get a little small taste of how it's to work, and that's how we look at filling the gap, the skills gap, really. Training for the job, both on a B2C view and a B2B. So on a B2C, looking at students that want to change their career, accelerate, and looking at ways of financing, and how we can reach broader audience, because that's what makes this reach. And on the B2B, also looking at how companies, at the end of the day, the companies are looking for this tech talent. They're not finding it, or they're not finding it enough, and we work with them in attracting and training the devs for that company. So you're ready to work at Mercado Libre, Quinto Andar, or whatever, different companies. So that's always our driver, like focus on getting ready for, you finish here, you start working.
No, that's great. And what is interesting is that, as you mentioned, like Fernando from Provi that's here, he plays a very important role by unlocking this demand, because there are a lot of people that sometimes they are not at a company that can actually sponsor this student, or a student cannot afford it. And basically, Provi comes to doing partnerships, right, with other educational institutions to allow them to get in. So how you work with those institutions and how you see Provi unlocking this demand?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Fernando. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Provi. So it's really interesting because, like in Brazil, we have not only in Brazil, but I think like in the whole world, we have a huge demand for technology students. And when you see like education, maybe like a student is coming from a background that he can afford that. And what Provi really does in the end is we try to do like a really non-traditional credit analysis in order to approve students that wouldn't be able to get that credit. So we look at not just like at his background, but what is this student going to be in the future? So it doesn't matter if he doesn't have a credit history, but if we know he's going to take like a really good course and he's going to have like a $1,000 income after 3 months of finishing the course, that's what we need. And this is how we approve the students. So I think like this is one of the many ways we're helping today. We started with this. So in the end, what we're trying to do is like giving access to education. And today we're giving much more than that. So we're giving like payment solutions for the schools, a SaaS for managing students, working capital loans for the schools. On the financing, we're like really flexible. We can go from like traditional financing up to 48 installments, income share agreements. So I think like in the end, we're bringing we're able to like let more students study even if they can't afford that by like giving a long period, and we're like sharing the risk with them. If they're taking like a course and if they're not gonna get a job after that, they're not gonna be able to get an income, we're also not gonna get any money. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, amazing. And it's interesting because now we see more on, the three of you talked a lot about how the learning system is, or how students can position themselves and how they can do it better to have a better job or anything like that. But we have on the other side of the table the companies, and they really want to build something for their employees to have a better workforce internally or retain talent. So Iona, you're in the educational space like for a while now, and you decided to create a very interesting solution at the moment that's bringing this good content that we have in Brazil from the Edtechs to those companies. But a question that we have here is this now the right timing? Why is now a must, or it's just a nice to have on the lenses of the companies?
That's a great question. Thank you, Carol. Hi, everyone. I'm Iona, CEO of Education Journey. Yes, I'm for a long time in the EdTech space, living in the Valley for 9 years. Since Stanford, I saw a lot of the first wave in EdTech coming in and a lot of good content coming in, not only in K-12, but also on the adult learning and so forth. And I realized that with the more disruption of technology we have anywhere, in education or not, the wider the delta of the skills we need to perform, everybody, in any vertical we have. The more we need to learn about how to deal with the new technologies and the new business models and the new way of doing everything that we are doing, again, in fintech or not. And from the company side, they are lost as well. So a couple of data points here for us to consider. Some interesting reports from the financial side says that there is an average increase of 17% year after year in the budget allocation for learning and development. Just last year, according to Harvard Business Review, there was deployed $300 billion in learning and development, but only 12% of the employers anywhere says that they did acquire the skills they need to perform their jobs. And with that, 62% of the workforce says they want to change jobs, transition to something else, either because they're burnout or because they are not performing good enough in what they're doing. So there's a clear demand right now, to answer your question, to deal with the reality of the skills gap that we have. 1 billion people need to be reskilled, according to the World Economic Forum, by 2030, which is tomorrow. And this number is going to increase ever more. I don't believe that it's only 1 billion people. It's going to be even higher than that. The more that technology we have deployed, the more people will need to know how to deal with the change. We're talking about AI disrupting jobs. We're talking about robots, performing better in a more efficient way, jobs that we do. So I think that the companies that are wanting to be in the forefront of the very fast-paced world that we live in are looking at this as a strategic move, not necessarily from the human resources department point of view, but from the CEO and CFO strategic planning to be ahead of the game and not let all the tech companies gain more market share and all the big enterprises lose a market share year after year. So companies are aware that they need to do something right now. The workforce is very much open and willing to get out of the comfort zone, even if they have like 20 years in the job. They are not performing good enough every quarter. And so education journey comes really to tackle this big problem. We don't know exactly how we're gonna, be in the best position, but so far we are trying our best, and I think that the market is ready.
Amazing. So it's interesting because now I think we have like the full spectrum of the Edtech space in Brazil and what's happening. But it's always good to have the lenses of the investor, right? Because as investors, we look at all the startups, different stages, what is happening, and we start to find some patterns in the industry, right? So what you see at monashees that when you look at this market, what gets you excited? Like, when you look, you say, now it's something that I really want to invest, and I know this is a really strong personal thesis for you. So share a little bit for us, like in the investor's lenses, like what gets you excited, and what are the patterns that you're seeing now in the industry?
No, that's a great point. And hi, everyone. My name is Sullyen from Monashees. So like you mentioned here, and a few of you also pointed out, we see that education has changed a lot, but yet before the pandemic started, it has been a very slow mover in comparison to fintech, retail, or e-commerce, and other disruptions that we had in the industry. But now after the pandemic, millions of people had to be staying at home, learning online, and not only learning, but also learning like new skills, new types of jobs, new ways to reach companies fully online, for example, sales and marketing, that really drives new skills that we would be demanding by the companies. So we at Monashees, we first invested in an Edtech company in 2007, and it was way earlier than we expected. So I think what gets me more excited is that everything that's happening now, it's definitely one of the first inflection points in Edtech. So now the disruption is really here. And in Latin America, we see a lot of tailwinds of digitalization that really understands more about how we could create larger companies and also attract more capital, because it's also something that is very important for us to continue creating great companies in education. But the first wave that we saw, it was all about digitalization of content, creating more access to people. And then after the pandemic, we're seeing amazing new models, new business models, like involving fintech and web, or new models within K-12, like really understanding the root of the problem caused there, corporate learning, digital skills, reskilling. So a lot of new models that gets us more excited that actually they're digital born. So different than the first wave, that they're getting huge tailwinds now, they're already born online. And then I think that's really gets us more excited, because we have a lot of other trends that are really important in Edtech, and especially in Brazil, because we are a social country. So when we look at engagement rates and how we can distribute content through new channels and make it more affordable and accessible to everyone, and especially increasing the high quality and different types of delivering the learning for the students and the people there. So I think the particularities that Brazil has really creates very innovative models that gets us more excited to really continue investing in education. And we really believe that what has happened before within other markets, such as fintech, as I mentioned, e-commerce, is just a matter of time on how they will get like huge tailwinds in Edtech. What is happening in India, for example, we see a lot of similarities that's going to be happening within a few years from now.
No, amazing. It's good that you brought this up, like on COVID, on the new trends that are coming. And at the portfolio at Valor, we see companies that got those tailwinds and got amazing results, and others that struggled a little bit and needed to change how their product and somehow, or change their approach or their business model, just to figure it out how they will play out. And this is a question that I will do actually for all of you in the panel, that is, COVID impact all of you in a sense. And now that we hope that we won't have like big waves coming and disrupting the market again, but after that, how you adjust your companies after this phase, and if you adjust the companies that you are in, how you're playing now, how you see your companies playing in the future, how those impacts change.
Okay, yeah, I think the COVID, the pandemic was kind of the big disruptor, in terms of, for many things, definitely for the education space. In our case, I think in general, the disruption came in the phase that now everybody has learned, has interacted, has through online platforms. Before, 2019, if you had to, learn something and it would be online, you'll probably be asking, okay, but how does Zoom work? And can I speak with the professor? Will he answer me? Is this recorded? Things that in a physical classroom, nobody would ask. There's a chair, the professor is here, things that we all culturally know. We're not accustomed to culturally being working with technologies or learning online. And that was in months, and really a shift that would have taken years. Now everybody, you might like it more, like it less, would work better for some things or worse, but every kid now has experience learning online, every professor, companies, and that, I think that's here to stay in terms of the cultural change of, okay, now I know how this works, I can use it whenever I think it's more valuable. Before was, I don't even know what this is. In our case was very, very positive because learning technology, basically you're using a computer, so it was, and you're using internet, and so that's very natural for our students. They're adult students, already know technology, allowed us to reach, broader space now that you didn't have to physically be somewhere at some point. And I think that was a big change, and it's here to stay. And also, again, in technology is the way also companies work. Devs in general are working remotely, will continue working remotely, and I think that's here to stay for sure. The cultural change, and in some cases a lot the learning for adults especially.
Okay, so COVID was the perfect storm for Brazil. We are still focused in Brazil in a lot of rote learning, direct instruction, paper-based, so big textbooks with student textbooks, and this is the only thing that reaches everywhere around the country. So not only the methodology was not connected to the student or connected to engaging whatever the student's doing, but also the way that you taught and the materials and the way that you were going around was something physical. When COVID hit, Brazilian teachers did not have the skills. Brazilian schools did not have the infrastructure, the technological infrastructure. We didn't have even the language of how we would connect to what student engagement was, or parents. Brazil has millions of students, so it is a booming edtech industry because we have millions of people that are just now being, just like Sebastian said, having to be in online and digitally. But for education especially, and for most of Brazil, this was a challenge that had all of the characteristics of a perfect storm. And for us, I mean, I can tell you guys a little story. We actually had just launched the first schools with our learning platform, Chloe, and we were just literally opening our lab school with 60 students. And then COVID started, and we just looked at each other and we said, you know what? This is when we're gonna see what's gonna go. We're just gonna open this. It was great. We're just gonna keep on fighting. And in about 2 months, we had, even though it was open, we had 200,000 teachers screaming and saying, please help me. I wanna see what you guys are doing, because what you're telling me is that there is a different way for me to connect to my students and for actually learning to happen. And maybe the story of Camino in the past 2 years was not the story of how we were more ready to face this, but it's the story of what learning looks like and where should it be happening. Should it be happening only in specific places, or how we should be connecting? And we have good learning theories. They're great hypotheses. The pedagogy actually counts. It's and the results we've seen, not only in student engagement and growth, and now having 600 schools choosing to change so that they're using technology to be able to connect to learners more, to not have that be an impediment or an issue towards learning, just like what happened when we brought in a geological barrier like COVID. And learning can continue happening. Sometimes we see it easier, and I think that I have a different situation than my fellow panelists, because the function of a school is to help generate equity. This is the place where you come in and you can come out a different way with different skills to a market that maybe is not ready, that you're 5 years old and you're coming in and you're learning and you're spending 12 years learning not only content, but your attitudes and the way that you're going to interact with the world and your creativity. And we don't have the luxury of just going into knowledge, because you're developing human beings, you're developing suggestions and ways that you're going to then later on will have to maybe not just do reskilling, but they'll be able to go there, and then they will be the great students that will come around and be like, okay, I know I need this, not just for a job, maybe for changing my life. But K-12 schools, this is where it happens. This is where you help develop, through a methodology, through the way you interact with the teacher, through helping schools financially, structurally change to make that learning happen. And I think that that's the story of Brazil right now. When you say, how COVID changed, I think COVID just changed education, and it put a light on how we need technology, but where we should be focusing in K-12 especially, and how we should be teaching our kids.
We saw this not only on technology course. Today we finance from technology courses all the way to industrial courses, health courses, and we saw this all kinds of courses. Students, they usually needed to go to a physical place in order to learn. And now that everything went online, they could just stay at their home and learn something. So we saw a huge increase in the number of students looking to study. So we were doing before COVID 1,000 students per month. Today we do almost 20,000 students per month. We saw a huge boom on this. And I think one of the big things that left from this is students, they're looking for something today at their time, knowledge pills, and not something that is 4-year course, 5-year course. They're still going to exist, but this is not for everyone. And I think that COVID helped unleash this, and now students are looking for many other ways to get education. And one of the other things we saw was when COVID hit, schools, they had to go online, because they were at that time 80% of our schools, they were physical, 20% were digital, and everyone had to switch to digital. And schools were struggling with this. And this is when we realized that we could help the schools, not just by financing the students, but also by giving other solutions to the schools, like working capital loans. So this is something that is, has changed a lot.
What do you see in the other?
Sure. So my first comment is that I am one of those examples that Sullyen said, that we are COVID native. We're not only digital native, but COVID native. And I think that that's a different experience from my colleagues, because we were born during COVID times. And I am even thankful for the perfect storm, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have stopped running in my wheel, and just delivering and achieving and doing something else, and not thinking about what my gut was telling me, because I didn't hear it. So just the small caveat. And then when we were designing how we would help the world go through COVID, which we didn't know what was going to happen and how the impact would extend throughout the world, I decided that Brazil would be the focus, because it's where my heart is where I want to focus my energy and everything. And I wanted to really find a solution where we could democratize the access to better jobs. And I think that COVID, just really put the foot on the door. And now I see beautiful stories. I was like thinking about you telling stories. So I have people in my team, and I serve people, and in my clients' teams, that are in the countryside of Minas. Who knows Brazil here know that Minas is a big state, a wonderful state. Shout out to Minas tribe people. They're fantastic. And they're only being able to join, their dream job in wherever they want to be, new banks of the world, iFoods, because of that COVID brought down all the barriers. And we now don't judge where you're coming from, and we're really looking at people from their skills point of view and their ability to prove that they're willing to learn and learn fast and perform and deliver. And so I think that COVID changed everything to everybody. And then the best hiring team, the people that are looking at the culture transformation, are looking at giving opportunities regardless of where people are. In that sense, we are exporting talent, right? There's a talent scarcity in the world, again, because of skills gap, because of the technology disruption. And I think that COVID had allowed us to really provide best content wherever you are, whatever you want to do, and whatever you want to focus on, even if it's hard skills, soft skills, or languages, if you're serving the Latin America, if you want to transition within the company you are. So I think that being a native COVID, I really understand that companies are giving fair choices to talented people wherever they are. And we want to help this wave by providing the skills that they want to do to fulfill their dream. So I think that we should always be optimistic, and we should always do lemonades from the lemons we have. And I think that this is the best we can do from the COVID storm. And I think that we should keep up providing the technology we want to give to the world, that we can continue giving the democratic opportunities for those who want to get out of the comfort zone and make it happen.
Totally. And it's interesting because in the speech of all of you was there are tailwinds that actually increase the value of you guys in the market. You basically increase the equity, was you're saying, and this is something that's amazing. But when we looked on the other side of the table as investor, you don't see that so clear. So when we look to the main deals that are happening, or the market is booming, but we are not sure if the capital markets are looking at this value as they should. So this is something that we have internal discussions inside Valor or inside monashees, I believe that you have, right? So, and how you see how you measure this value it was really hard. And when we are looking to do a nice investments, we need to look at the exit at the end of the day. So in exit, especially for Latin companies, it's growing, but in education, not there much yet. So how you see the exit scenario for basically for them in a few years, and how you see the scenario now?
That's a very good question. And we have been talking a lot about this. I think from this panel, we can understand that Brazilians and Latin Americans as a whole, we are very resilient. And I think one point that really stands out is how much experienced new entrepreneurs are. So we are having second-time entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs that are now looking into that tech market. So if you have an amazing team and a big market, I think the exit eventually will come. Of course, there's still some doubt when we see great examples, as I mentioned, again, in fintech, but we have great large companies, public companies in Brazil. Of course, they suffer a little bit from the tailwinds, not trading at the best multiples right now, but they were the best acquirers in the region for quite some time. So we are now seeing that as an inflection point also in terms of ambition for the founders and how big their companies could get. So if you have more experienced founders, large markets, great tailwinds in terms of digitalization with COVID and everything that happened, align with more capital. So Latin America as a whole is booming now. So I think globally we crossed the mark of $17 billion invested in venture capital, 3 times the last year, and Brazil is 60% of the region. So we are definitely a proxy for what's happening in Latam. So I think access to capital, more quality people within a large market, I think, as Leticia mentioned, here is the perfect storm, and plus resilient. And I think the greatest models, as you mentioned here, is how to give the local flavor of Brazil so we can really export more global innovation and not only like having models that we look for benchmarks, not in Asia, but India, as I mentioned, has more similarities than Brazil than the US. That's why we can keep mentioning that. But I think if you really find how Brazilians are really learning into other models, how they're really engaging with new content, especially in community base, I think is #1 point to really build a great education company. I think we will get there in terms of great exits. And now we are seeing that there are companies that are already crossing the mark of $500 million, for example, in evaluation in Edtech. That was unheard of like a few years ago. So I think definitely we're getting there.
You want to comment?
I was just going to compliment coming from the classroom and then into a series of being an entrepreneur in different education settings and, nonprofits and smaller companies and schools. But now at Camino, I think there's one thing that to complement, and I think it's very nice that you brought the resilience. I think there's also the resilience to learn what is going to be like. This is one thing and maybe, all the time we're trying to compare, this EdTech is the Netflix of something. And this is the way that we talk about education. But I think that what she's bringing is there is also something that still doesn't have a name, because the gap in Brazil is so big, because we're talking about and Latin America, but Brazil especially, that has such amazing qualities in connection, in people, in learning, in innovation. And there are a lot of things that still don't have names, but it is about a resilient, experienced, connected market that we're talking about. And I think that that's like a good invitation for whoever is here, which is, come see Brazil and take that time as investors, as entrepreneurs, as whoever you are interested in bringing more knowledge and more access to Brazilians, because we do really have a lot of things. There's an educator, his name is José Pacheco, he's from Portugal, and he actually says, and he's like, I guarantee, he's a really well-known educator, and he says, innovation in education, whatever the sector you are, is gonna come from Brazil, because connection and the way that you relate to one another, Brazilians are expert at that. They're expert at learning. They still don't have all the machinery, they still don't have all the technology, but they're the ones that have the hard thing, which is the resilience, which is the connection. And in a world where, EdTech is amazing because it allows for that, but it's not what, it shouldn't be just all the center stage. It's not just about the technology, it's about learning. So I think that was a great talk. Sorry, I just thought it was
a great
segue.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing because we don't have any digital first IPO'd company in Brazil in terms of in the EdTech space. We do not have. So you guys are like the next ones that we are really looking and saying, okay, who will break this barrier? Because we have traditional companies that just put let's see, they have a tech piece inside, but they're not truly digital from scratch. So this is the wave that we are really excited, especially as investors, to see. So, for example, we have this Complica coming from our portfolio that we are really vouching for them, and we are expecting for them to change everything. And we look this coming as the whole ecosystem. This is why it's so interesting. So we see Provi in the fintech, edtech space coming out. We see Iona coming from all this part of education and the continuing education piece and the upskilling piece with the corporate. So it's a different approach. And then Digital House coming with again, with upskilling, but in the other lenses, like going closer to the students and allowing them to get better skills to get better jobs. And then you, basically, it's getting from the scratch. So you have, I think, one of the biggest responsibilities, because it's learning, like fixing the learning issue in Brazil. It's hard. So I just want, again, to say that everyone is, I'm really excited, actually, to have not all of you sharing, for everyone here that's in the panel, a little bit more about what is Edtech in Brazil. And I just want to thank you all and to the GSV team. Thanks.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.